we as women, how can we expect men to be accountable when we are not holding our peers accountable for the damage that has been done?
That's right.
Now here's the thing, you know, and I'm going to ask you guys a tough question, and hopefully Demetria will get back in here for this one because I want her to get this in too. You know, you guys are basically saying many, maybe not all, I don't know a number, you haven't given a number of what percentage, but there's enough Black women out there who have issues that the brothers are finding it hard to find women that they could create families with, sweet women, women who are cooperative, feminine, that they can work with. They're basically saying, we can't find what we want here in America. What argument should I present to them to tell them, okay, I know that these women aren't ready, but you should wait for these Black women anyway to get themselves ready? Is that an argument that you would ask? Would you ask them to wait? Because that's what a lot of Black Americans say. Hey, you should, even though we have these special set of circumstances, so you just need to wait before you get your family. So get you one of these ladies, clean her up, help her out, get her together mentally and also sometimes physically. Is that what you're telling these young men to do? What?
You know, just like young Black girls, they're raised up to, oh, well, man got to have this. He's got to be tall. He's got to be educated. He's got to have money. Young men need to start hearing that too. So I do not advocate young men to wait on women who are overweight. I do not advocate young men to wait on young ladies who have a bunch of babies. You know, the young men that I mentor, they know that I have a choice word for these babies, what are used in the Bible. These are bastards, you know, because they have no fathers, you know. So I do not advocate men to wait for young ladies to get it together. I think they should get someone of their equal, that they're compatible with, that they can grow with and grow their foundation. A lot of these young ladies who are overweight have a whole lot of children, you know, and all this going on. It's just a whole lot of drama that they just don't need. They need to be enjoying their lives with someone who are of equal compatibility with them, and that's on the same mind level, spirituality, physically fit.
All right, so Kimberly, you have a son, so I'm gonna ask you a question. Do you want one of these young women that we see in the Black community? Do you want one of them raising your grandchildren?
No. Dennis, you and I grew up in South.
I'm sorry. Hold on. Because that wasn't the answer that I thought you was gonna like work around it, and maybe there's some people and there's some good ones out there. You said no. Let me ask that question again, because I was. Do you want one of these young ladies in the Black community that we have now raising your grandchildren? That's the question I asked. I'm ready now. Go ahead.
No.
Oh, wow.
Dramatization.
After a car wreck, you may have to fight with a highly trained insurance company rep whose job is to knock your damaged claim down and out. It's a bad idea to enter the ring alone against a trained boxer, and it could be a bad idea to fight against a big insurance company by yourself. When the bell rings, attorney Dennis Sperling will be there to fight for your rights. If you've been seriously injured in a car wreck, call me, attorney Dennis Sperling, at 866-529-2444. That's 866-529-2444.
Or there's still going to be those eyes, even though, you know, segregation is over. Down south, people still rarely mix. You see, you understand what it's like to be driving down the street thinking maybe I don't have my driver's license. A cop pulls up behind you. You know how that feels. You know how it feels. If he looks in the window and he sees you're Black, you might get tailed for a few blocks. He might pull you over. That feeling of tension that you have, irrespective of the fact that you're a doctor, irrespective of the fact that I'm a lawyer, we all fit the stereotype. So my question to you is, Doc, how did it feel in Brazil? You can speak generally. You go down there, describe what you saw, describe how it felt to be around all those Black and brown people, and you just blended right in. Go ahead and go. That's the first thing I want you to deal with.
Hey, what's up, everybody? If you appreciate the format and you appreciate what we're doing here, then make sure you contribute to the Cash App, make sure you contribute to the PayPal, make sure you donate to the Super Chat. It's only you and your contributions that keep this thing going. Thanks.
And we got into the city, we got into Copacabana. I did not feel the type of surveillance. I did not feel the kind of hostile environment that we are accustomed to here in the United States, bro. I mean, I felt at home. I felt like I belonged there, like I was raised there, man. I mean, seriously, you know what I mean? And I know that, you know, there are no perfect, you know, environments and what have you, bro. But bro, I did not feel like I was a stranger, a foreigner, like I was unwelcome, like I was out of place, like I did not belong. And I felt that way the entire time I was there. I was there 8 days, and you know, I traveled with about 30 black men, and we were there that whole time, man. And I did not feel like a fish out of water. Not at one moment, bro. I felt like I had been there before. You know what I mean? And yeah, it was a stress-free feeling.
Just to lay a foundation for everybody, out of around 191 million Brazilians, 91 million identify themselves as white, 82 million as mixed race, and 15 million as black. So technically, it's, you know, this is. You might have people who are white, they call themselves white, but in actuality they're mixed. People can say what they want to say, but the bottom line is you have almost 100 million people who are of African descent.
Oh man, it was a wonderful feeling. Rather, it was overwhelming. You know, again, man, it felt like home, bro. I mean, there was no anxiety or worry on my part. And I tell you, man, that stuff, it gets into your soul, man, because you feel it. And I mean, it's just rhythmic. I mean, and so, you know, you're up in there. I'm up in Black Rio, man. And I'm like, you know what? I mean, this is a black culture, black experience. They have their own thing, man.
But the average person might not understand what you mean. A typical American thinks America is the center of the world. We're the point of focus. You have our lovely ladies here will tell you they're the most beautiful women in the world. There are no other women more beautiful than them. They will tell you the rest of the world is copying our hip hop style and saggy pants. And they will tell you all these things, many of whom never even left the country, because only 2% of black people have passports. So they've never actually been anywhere else. So in their mind, we're the center of the universe. So please explain to them what you mean when you say nobody cares about what we're doing here in America. Basically, yeah. We're not the point of reference.
We are not. We are not the standard.
The United States, let me tell you what we have here. We have cold weather. We have mean, ugly, racist people. We have a hostile environment. And we're still getting over this whole Donald Trump phenomenon and everything that happened 20 years leading up to that. They might want to come visit. They might want to go shopping. They might want to visit California, go to Disneyland, but then they want to go back home. My name is Dennis Sperling. If you've been involved in an accident, call me and I'll fight for you. I'm not an actor or a celebrity spokesperson. I'm a real trial lawyer, and I'll appear before real judges and real juries on behalf of people with serious injuries. So when I say I'll fight for you, I mean it, and I'll back it up. If you've been hurt in an automobile or 18-wheeler accident, contact me toll-free at 866-529-2444, and I'll fight for your rights.
Hi, my name is Dennis Sperling. I'm not a lawyer, but my daddy is.
Yeah, if you've been hurt in a car accident, call my daddy.
No need to scream and yell like a little kid.
Yeah, no,
My daddy will fight for your rights.
Yeah, fight for your rights.
If you've been involved in a car accident, call my daddy, Attorney Dennis Sperling.
Hello, I'm attorney Dennis Sperling. If you've been injured in a car wreck, call me at 713-229-0770.
Call my daddy.
And they came up with a scam, which was, look, all of these black people at the bottom who want to see something about themselves, let's appeal to their lowest common denominator. So instead of ideating on black men getting ahead, having good jobs, going to college, doing all of this, which was practical because it kept you from getting a 1A and an all expense paid vacation to Suriname, well, they started glorifying pimps, hoes, drug dealers, gangsters, murderers, thieves, the whole 9 yards of dysfunction, and they've been on that ever since. I saw this, like, for example, when I was the public defender, my white subordinates had a real problem. Some of them were going into the black neighborhoods and interviewing black defendants and black witnesses. All this stuff everybody's worked up about police killings.
Yeah.
LAPD killed that many. All of them you've heard about over the last 4 or 5 years. They killed that many in every 1 or 2 week period.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was brutal.
And you were the valedictorian. You were the valedictorian of Dorsey High School. Now, I graduated from Manual Arts High School, which is up the street on King Boulevard.
I know where it is.
And you graduated from
Dorsey. I was
Dorsey.
going there, but I wound up transferring to Dorsey.
How did you survive the distractions of LA in the 1960s with everything that was going on? And if you can describe
it was hard.
Yes, sir.
It was hard, and still to this day, I cuss.
I hope everybody's enjoying their Sunday. This is Dennis Sperling, and I'm back again. I want to talk to you guys about another interesting conversation, but before related to the Holy Scripture. But before I get started, I want to give a big shout out to Brandon Moore Hargrove, a new member. Another big shout out to Volcanus. Thank you so much for the contribution. And another big shout out to my longtime buddy, Mike Green. What's happening, Mike? Mike and I go way back to South Central LA and high school, growing up in the early 90s, hanging out in South Central. But either way, I want to talk to you guys about a very interesting subject, and that is the story of Solomon. Realistically, I want to talk to you about the wisdom of Solomon. Now, before we get started, I want to first say thank you all for your contributions. Thank you for your dedication. Thank you for your membership. And I know there are plenty of things you guys could be doing on a Sunday other than listening to Uncle D talk to you about the Holy Scripture. Now, the reason that I do this is because I know there's a lot of you that don't even go to church. How do I know? The stats show that young black people, especially young black men, have abandoned the church. They've abandoned the church because the church doesn't really talk to them. It doesn't, they talk at you, but they don't talk to you. They don't really acknowledge your needs right now. And on top of that, you guys sense that the word is being taught in the church is not really, it's not in your opinions, oftentimes, is the veracity of it is not always there. In other words, some of you guys have had bad experiences. You've seen a lot of preachers mishandle money and other things like that. And so you become disheveled with the church. So what I've decided to do is bring the church here right to you. So you can continue your exercise, you can barbecue, you can put earphones on and just listen to what I have to say. And what we're going to do is talk about a famous person from the Holy Bible. And his name is King Solomon. Okay. His other name was Jedidiah. And according to the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament, he was a super rich, wealthy, and wise king. And he united Israel and he succeeded his father, King David. You know, David and Goliath, that was his dad. The conventional dates of Solomon's reign are from 970 to 931 BEC, which is about 40 years. All right. Normally, given an alignment with dates of David's reign, he described as king of the United Monarchy, which broke apart into the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah shortly after his death. Following the split, his patrilineal descendants rule over Judah alone. In other words, his children, his father's children. You know. King Solomon was confronted with a question, presented it, and this is what I want to talk about, right? I want to talk to you guys about these baby mamas out here. That's what I want to talk about. So it just so happens, and many of you may be familiar with this story, you know, but the thing is, it's been read to you, but you really haven't delved deep into it. So King Solomon was confronted with a question presented to him by two women who alleged a claim over a child. After the king determined that both women were citizens of his kingdom, he made the decision to cut the child in half and give each mother one half of the child. Okay. Thereafter, something happened, a reaction of the women. He elected to give the woman who was willing to give up custody of the child ownership or motherhood rights over the child. And there are two lessons that we can learn from this story. But before we go further, I want to give you a few more details about King Solomon. Solomon, again, was a biblical king and was famous for his wisdom. In 1 Kings, he sacrificed to God, and God later appeared to him in a dream, asking Solomon what he wanted from God. In other words, God is going to give him whatever dream you got a wish from God, right? Most of us, fancy car, fine women, right? A lot of money, right? Some of y'all might want to, I don't know, grow wings and fly around the world. I don't know. You want the power of invisibility? You see what I'm saying? Solomon didn't ask for any of that. He didn't even ask for riches. Solomon asked for wisdom, and God was pleased. God personally answered Solomon's prayer, promising him great wisdom because he did not ask for self-serving rewards like long life or the death of his enemies. Instead, what? He asked for wisdom. And so that says a lot. That says a lot about who he is. Because he knew he was going to be the leader. So what do you want? You need wisdom so you can properly lead your people, right? So this is what Solomon asked for. So that kind of lets you know the character of who you're dealing with, right? This is trying to understand, who are we dealing with? Who is this man that God bestowed this great wisdom on? Who is this Solomon? Who is he? And see, that's the thing that we have to understand. God acknowledged that he's an unselfish person. That's the thing you got to understand, unselfish. So perhaps, again, and so now we'll dig into some of the stories, but that's something we can start with. Perhaps the best known story for his wisdom is the judgment of Solomon. Two women each lay claim to being the mother of the same child. Solomon easily resolved the dispute by commanding the child to be cut in half. What a grotesque thing to do right there in the king's court. He said, give me that baby. I'm going to cut this baby in half. And I'm going to give both of you women this child. This this is the story. Now, there's a backstory to it, and I'll explain it to you. Solomon easily resolved the dispute by commanding the child to be cut in half and shared between the two. One woman promptly renounced her claim, providing that she would rather give up the child than see it killed. Solomon declared the woman who showed compassion to be the true mother entitled to the whole child. Now, here's what you got to understand. In this particular situation, there were two women, and they were apparently prostitutes. I guess prostitution was very common back then, but these were two prostitutes, and they had both given birth to two baby boys. Now, clearly there was only one baby, right? The story behind it is that one of the children died, and before the other mother realized that the other woman's child had died, she got rid of her deceased child's body, and then went and stole the other child from the mother while she was laying down with it, and then put it in her crib. And so when she woke up, it's like, I don't know where your child is. This is my child. And there was nobody there to say anything about it. Right? So there are no witnesses. We don't know who did it. This is what we're dealing with. And then there's another story that says that the child, one was a stepmother, or one was a mother-in-law, and one was the daughter-in-law, and they both were pregnant at the same time. And so the mother-in-law apparently, or either the mother or the daughter, lost their child. And so if the child was around, that's one thing. But if the child disappears, then that means you have to raise that bastard child with no father around. Because remember, both of them were prostitutes. And so that would make your life very hard. So to have the child cut in half, who cares? That means I'm free, you see? And so it was interesting. Now, these are all the laws played out. And remind you, the king was in charge of judicial making. That's why they had something called the king's court. You would hold court. The king was literally the judge. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this video. I want you guys to listen to this video, right? And I'm going to put this overlay here so that I don't get a copyright issue. I don't have any issues with these YouTube here. So I'm going to put this video up here so you guys can listen to it. And we'll just cover it up. Hold on 1 minute. I'm going to let this play, but you guys listen to it. I'll be right here. And we'll get this going. Make sure, if you can hear it,
There are
hit the
many
number one
figures in
button.
the Old Testament who are considered to be wise, but one character from the Holy Scriptures that stands out when we think of wise men is none other than the wise King Solomon, a man who is credited with unifying Israel under peace, stabilizing the economy, and building some truly magnificent structures. But like all good things, Solomon would eventually be lured away from the blessings his God had given him, and would soon stray under the pressures of his own moral temptations. For the purpose of this video though, we'll be looking at Solomon's early days, and in the infancy of his rule, where he first gained his reputation as a wise king. Solomon is described as always having been blessed and loved by God, even as a baby, given that he is considered to have been a peace offering from God to King David, after God killed David's firstborn child, having conceived the child in an adulterous relationship. Despite having 6 older half-brothers, King David was convinced by his wife, Bathsheba, and the prophet Nathan, who was said to have raised Solomon while the king was away, to make Solomon king. Evidently, there were others who believed Solomon was special, and that as a king, his potential would flourish and everyone would benefit. By electing Solomon, one might also say that it denied the ambitious Adonijah, another son of King David, from taking the throne himself. When Solomon did become king, he was very quick to vanquish his opposition and assume the role of king, although he wasn't particularly sure of himself.
So before we go any further, I want to recap what you just heard. Okay. So basically what you just heard was that Solomon was the second son of King David and Bathsheba. And what you guys may remember is that Bathsheba was married to a soldier. I believe his name was, he was a Hittite, and he was a soldier. And King Solomon, King David had him killed. Okay. King David basically had, let me see, I want to make sure I got this right. King David had Bathsheba's first husband murdered. How did he do that? Well, basically what he did was he was in charge of the army, but he liked Bathsheba. He saw her. She was good looking. He had sex with her. She got pregnant. And then in order to try to conceal this adultery, what he did was, and this is David, he sent this man home to be with his wife, and the guy refused to be with the wife because he was at war, and it was something that was against their tradition. When you're at war, you're on the front lines, you know, you don't want to mess around with your woman because it should make you weak, right? And so what ended up happening? Well, what ended up happening was, you know, David said, well, I got to get rid of this guy. So he sent him to the front lines, had him killed. And with that baby that was born, that baby died. So God basically, and to reconcile with King David, he gave Bathsheba and King David a second child, and that second child was Solomon. Now, King David already had several other children, several other heirs. And what did we hear about Solomon? Solomon, once he took reign, he was quick to dispatch the other ones. In other words, he killed them and got rid of them. So he killed his brothers and sisters, or brothers, anybody that was an heir. This is who this man is, okay? So just because a person is God's favorite, don't imbue these heavenly qualities on him, okay? It's not that he was perfect, he was just God's favorite. And God's favorite does not necessarily have to be because you're this holy, righteous, upstanding person. Clearly, King Solomon had flaws. And if you listen, he was unsure of himself at the time when he took over the reign. So let's continue listening. Let's get back to it. But if you like what you're hearing, if you appreciate these type of stories, if you like these in-depth studies on these famous characters from the Bible, make sure you hit the #1 button. Also, contribute to the Super Chat, the Cash App, and the PayPal.
The story of Solomon's judgment begins where God appears to Solomon after having been pleased in the way in which he ascended the throne. He tells Solomon that he wishes to grant him anything that he desires, and that all he has to do is ask. We see how noble and some might say pure Solomon is, for he doesn't ask for power, riches, women, or any sort of otherworldly gift, but instead asks for wisdom, and wisdom alone. Solomon was aware of his own limitations, and while he was a king, he knew he could not be a good ruler if he did not possess knowledge. In a sense, you might say that this is selfless, as it appears that Solomon's only desire is to lead his people effectively under his God, as well as to keep them safe and see them prosper. Pleased that Solomon did not ask for riches and glory and was only content with the ruling of his subjects, God granted Solomon with his request, and thus made him more wise than any other man who had ever existed. However, because Solomon was so modest in his request, and God sensed he was sincere and authentic, he went ahead and granted him riches and glory as well. From this, we can gather that the story aims to teach us humility, and that Solomon's God respects one who puts others, or the greater good, in front of their own desires. The moral here is that in seeking to serve something higher than yourself, the rewards can be greater than what you might have originally conceived. A short time after having received his wisdom from God, two women, some describe them as two prostitutes, come before Solomon with a dilemma. The women lived in the same house, and both had given birth very recently. However, one of the babies had died. It's understood that the mother of the dead baby switched her baby with the one that was alive. When this mother woke up, she realized that the dead baby in her possession was not hers. She confronted the other woman, but she denied all knowledge of this and denied the accusation made against her. King Solomon was deemed the only man astute enough to determine who the real mother was. It seems Solomon was swift in his decision too, though he did not simply pick without reason. He called for a sword and told one of his servants to cut the baby in half so that both of the women would have a piece of the child. The fake mother accepted this decision, but the other woman cried out that despite being the baby's real mother, she was willing to surrender custody of the baby to the other woman if the baby was allowed to live. Realizing that this woman loved the child so much that she was willing to give it up so that it might survive, Solomon deduced that she had to have been the real mother. When the people learned of how Solomon had ingeniously solved the problem, his reputation as the wise king began to spread. The two women in question are never named, but it's understood that the two are prostitutes, or at the very least, widows, given the absence of their husbands. In biblical accounts and the nature of patriarchal society, the husbands were usually responsible for the solving of issues between women. If such an incident was brought before the king, it would be the husbands of these women who would represent them in court. A Jewish interpretation explores the idea that the two women are related, one being the mother-in-law and the other being the daughter-in-law. Both, though, had given birth after their respective husbands had died. Due to a custom, the daughter-in-law who was the liar in this case would have to marry her brother-in-law. As her brother-in-law was the living child, she was required to marry him when he came of age. By lying about the boy being her own child, she would not be required to marry him. But when Solomon suggested cutting the child in half, this would absolve her of any responsibility to the child at all. So she was all but willing to agree to the murder of the child. Another interpretation highlights the maternal instincts of a woman, that they can be so strong, one might fabricate a drastic lie in order to maintain their child, or in this case, maintain the facade of having a child at all. Other ideas suggest that the two women were rivals, and that the woman who had lost her child succumbed to the mindset that if she couldn't keep her baby, then her rival shouldn't have kept hers either. From this standpoint, we see the vindictiveness of what a bitter rivalry can lead us to, that a woman in this instance would sooner see the death of an innocent baby than see her rival have the upper hand. The two women also remain unnamed, not necessarily to downplay their importance as women, but more so to enhance Solomon's character and make him and only him the focal point of this tale. In this instance, Solomon is the hero, and it is his wisdom, which God gave him, which brings about the restoration of order in this scenario. Another variation to exemplify King Solomon's wisdom is after his reputation reaches the ears of Queen Sheba. Sheba, seeking to...
Okay, so basically, you guys, let me get this off the screen. So basically, what you heard was all the possibilities that King Solomon was comprehending when these two women. First, the two women were either prostitutes or widows. There's a theory that one was the mother-in-law and one was the daughter-in-law, and both of them had lost their husbands. At that particular time period, what happens is, and you guys have probably read this story before, if your brother died, then you were required to marry his sister. Why is that? Because if she married another man, then all of your brother's wealth would go to that other man. So it would effectively leave the family. So what biblical law had at that time, or the law governing the Hebrews, the Jewish people at the time, was in order to keep the money in the family, you have to sleep with your sister's, with your brother's wife if your brother passes away. That's what happened. That way it all stays in the family. His children basically become your children. So you got an uncle raising his children, his brother governing his wealth. And so it keeps things in the family. It's the way you keep things within the family. That's basically how that goes. So in a situation where you have a small child who is born to the mother-in-law, that is now this daughter-in-law, that is now the daughter-in-law's to be husband, if her husband, because that would have been her husband's brother, even though her husband died before her brother was born, that would be her husband's brother. And so she would then have to wait until he got 12, 13, 14, 15 to marry him. But that's how that would work. And so Solomon is considering all this. Maybe they're just rivals. Maybe they just don't like each other. Maybe the fact that this child died, I don't care if that one has died. I don't care if, since the one of the rivals' child died, she doesn't care if the other rival's child is killed. So what does that mean? That woman who has that child, the woman who doesn't care if the child is cut in half, she's unfit to be mother. And that even if it's her own child, you see? So what I'm trying to get to you guys is when you run through these different scenarios, there is no proof that the child that Solomon awarded, well, there's no proof that the mother that Solomon awarded the child to was the actual mother. See, Solomon didn't care who the biological mother was. In the actual reading of the Bible, the Lord, Solomon asked her, bend down or, bow before you talk to me. Are you a citizen of this state? Well, then you bow down when you talk to me. Okay. So two things happen right there. First, obviously, Solomon enforced his will. But secondly, and more importantly, he established that this woman is a citizen of his state. Both women were citizens of the state. And so he's sitting as the king. He looked at this as a situation. What is in the best interest of the state? Well, what's in the best interest of the state is that this child, who may grow up to be a blacksmith, a warrior, a carpenter, a politician, whatever, that he have the best mother possible to raise him. That is what's in the interest of the state. Here we have two women who are perfectly fit to raise this child physically, but who of them will make the best mother? That is the sole concern of the state. They didn't have DNA tests back then. All Solomon did, he was trying to figure out who's going to be the best mother. And if you read into that, he never confirms that this is the biological mother. Again, they didn't have DNA tests and blood tests. He simply determined who would be the best mother. How did he determine that? Well, I'm going to take this baby and I'm going to cut this baby in half. The woman who was okay with the child being cut in half, clearly she did not have the best interest of the child in heart. Whether she was the biological mother mad because the other woman would have got the child and she didn't want her rival to have it, or whether or not she was the daughter-in-law who didn't care if the child was cut in half, because then that way she wouldn't have to marry this child when he got older. So that means the other person, with the other woman who wanted to save the child, would be the best mother. And again, what's in the best interest of the child? Who, and this is the way the state looks at it. It's in the best. Solomon was looking at it just like the courts that we have today look at. What's in the best interest of this child? And this is the wisdom of Solomon. And when you understand where he's coming from, you'll get it. Now, there's two lessons we can learn from that. Number one, a woman who is a good mother will give up custody of her child in order for him to have a life, or have a better life, right? That's a woman trying to be a good mother. Now we can read into that, we can interpret all that. But what we do know is a bad mother would rather see her child die than give up custody or authority over the child. How many women do we know like that? Fellas, do you know women who would rather keep the child in her possession, living in squalor, living in poverty, living in chaos? She might have men running in and out. Remember, these were two prostitutes, right? So you got men running in and out of here. You got a mama that don't care about you, but she doesn't want your daddy to have you, or she doesn't want you to go somewhere else under any circumstances. Some of you men are dealing with women like that. You're paying child support to a woman who doesn't even care about the children. She just doesn't want you to have them. She'll come drop the kids off and then turn back around an hour and a half later and come pick them up. Well, they need to go. Or it's your weekend or your week to have the children. And because you got a new girlfriend, right, who's cooking and cleaning and, being everything a woman should be, she doesn't want that child around that woman, because even though it's in the best interest, even though that non-biological mother figure is a better, would be a more maternal and more motherly to that child than she could be, especially if you got to say, look at the situations where you have biological mothers who would rather hold a child than to give them up for adoption when they can have a much better life. Think about that. See, this is what you have to think about. Think about that. Those of you guys who appreciate this conversation, man, make sure you hit the #1 button. Also, let me just double check. I need you guys to hit the thumbs up button. Let me get 10 likes. Go ahead and hit 10 likes. How do we get 2 down? How do people dislike this video? We're talking about the Bible. This is a Sunday sermon, a lesson in King Solomon. Who dislikes this? That's what I don't understand, man. You know? But yeah, Crypto Cling says, saddest behavior ever to use a child as a tool. And that's exactly what's happening. But it's interesting. So Solomon weighing out all of this. I have to do what's in the best interest. I don't really care which one of these women is going to be who's the biological mother. I don't care who birthed the child. All I care about is who's going to raise this child and be the best mother to this child. Both of y'all are prostitutes. This is what King Solomon. Both of y'all, you don't have husbands. Your husbands are supposed to be in here talking to me because that's who's supposed to be up front. You don't even know to bow and call me king. You see what I'm saying? This is the thing. You're not even following the protocols of the court. Where's your husband? But you 2 baby mamas coming up here fighting over there. Let me tell you what, I'm gonna cut this baby in half. And whichever 2 of you, whichever you 2 harlots is gonna be the best mother, that's who this poor child is gonna get. This is basically how Solomon was looking at it. Solomon was a real cutthroat dude, and it's important that we go back to how he dispatched his half brothers who were threats to the throne. As soon as he got to power, what did he do? He said, we're going to get rid of them. And they was done. He had them X'd out. This is who we dealing with as far as who Solomon is. Solomon was not some nice, we always have this thing about bestowing these godlike characteristics on King Solomon. Solomon had 700 wives, 300 concubines. Did you think he cared about what women have to say? Do you think his sole purpose, he wasn't even interested in himself? The reason he asked for wisdom is because he could ask for wealth. He could ask for longevity. He didn't. He asked for wisdom because he knew he was going to be the ruler of the nation of Israel. And so he wanted to be the best ruler possible. So he was not a selfish man in that regard. His sole purpose was being a good guardian of the state, being a good king. And so when you understand that if he wasn't concerned about his own best interest, then what makes you think he would be concerned about making either one of these women happy? He was only concerned about the state and whether or not the state of Israel would benefit from the decisions he made. And the decision he made was to give it to the woman who seemed to be the most fit mother, the one who's willing to sacrifice her own feelings and her own comfort, even if it meant giving that child to another woman to raise. That's who he gave the child to. And you have to put yourself in the mind of a king. I talk about this in my books, Rules to Live By, how to maintain peace of mind and happiness in a conflicted world. And when I discuss the king's eye view, which is a concept that I came up with. What is the king's eye view? Well, you've heard of a bird's eye view. A bird can see everything, right? Because he's at a different level. He can see the landscape. He can see a rabbit over here. He can see a field mouse over here. He can see a barnyard over here because he's up and he has a different angle. The same thing with the king. The king sees things different. This young boy is going to grow up to be a soldier or a blacksmith, and we're going to have to deal with him. And we want to make sure he has the best mother of these two of what's available, because that's good for the state. So King Solomon was looking at things from the king's eye view. Many of you don't have the purview of the king because you're not kings. You work a regular job. Nobody is in charge. Nobody is in charge of you're not governing anybody's salary. You don't have to worry about the health insurance, their security. You don't run any businesses. You don't run any corporations. You don't run any nations. So there's no need for you to have the king's eye view. But there are those who do have the king's eye view. And again, if you want some more detail on this, I have a complete discussion in my books, Rules to Live By, and I discuss the king's eye view in this gold book over here. Okay. So if you want those books, you can email me at sperlingdennis@gmail.com, and it'll help you truly understand the things the concepts I'm discussing, like Solomon's wisdom. And if you understand Solomon's wisdom, and it will really enhance your life. So the next concept, I've kind of already dipped into it. Whether or not the woman who was given the right to be the mother of the child was actually the biological mother is irrelevant to the king. And this is what I was talking to you about. Again, the king's primary concern is the well-being of the state, but giving the child to the mother who would see him killed, as opposed to seeing him, or who would give him away, as opposed to seeing him dead. King Solomon gave custody to the woman who cared more for the child's life than her own satisfaction. In doing so, she demonstrated that the state would be better served by allowing her to raise a child who would in all likelihood be a better citizen. Right? I mean, does everybody get that concept? Do you get that? Are we clear now? Are we clear now that King Solomon did not know who the biological mother was? Are we clear with that? Are we clear with that? And so MHC says, Uncle D reads the comments for ideas. This is what I always comment. Think like a king, not a servant. Well, actually, I actually wrote about this in my book 10 years ago. So, not really, but that's a good thing. Think like a king, not like a serf. But if you want to check my books out, that's a concept that I have in this gold book right here. So, but yeah, I'm glad we're on the same page, MHT. That's good. But either way, there's something else I want you guys to see. I'm going to put another story in here for you guys. Another one having to do with King Solomon. And it's just a retelling of the same story, but I think it's important. So let's go ahead and check that out. And those of you guys who appreciate what I'm doing here, make sure you contribute to the Super Chat, the Cash App, and the PayPal. Let's check this second story out.
Anything you want, definitely I will fulfill.
Solomon, young and humble, spoke to God.
I know great responsibility is involved in governing God's people. So I pray to you that I ask for wisdom sufficient for doing the job. I am pleased with your request. Thank you, my lord. You might have asked for wealth, political, or military security, long life or fame, but instead you asked for wisdom to carry out responsibilities given to you. So I will give you exceptional wisdom, unlike anyone else before or after you. I also give you wealth, respect, and security which you didn't ask for.
As promised, God gave King Solomon exceptional wisdom. One day, Solomon happened to judge a case of unusual difficulty. Two women came to King Solomon, applicant and defendant. Each had a baby. One baby had died and the other one was alive.
Oh, great king, I am the mother of the surviving child who is in her hands.
Each woman claimed to be the mother of the surviving infant. The crowd which gathered in the court was eager to know how the king would judge the case.
I know clearly one woman is lying. But who's that? I have to be very careful in delivering the judgment.
King thought for a while.
Who's there? Bring me a sword.
There was a murmur in the crowd. A servant brought a sword.
Now I order you to cut the child into 2 parts and give 1 half to each woman.
The crowd was stunned with the cruelty of this court order. The woman who had filed suit couldn't bear to see her child killed.
O great mighty king, please withdraw your order. I will withdraw my suit. You can judge in favor of my opponent, but please spare my child's life. I cannot see my child being killed in front of me.
I like the king's decision. Cut him in two halves.
I withdraw my order. I order that the living baby be given to the first woman. She is his mother.
Thank you, my great king.
To Solomon's wisdom was immediately obvious to everyone present.
All right. So again, that's another telling of the story, and what you'll notice in that particular version, they referred to her as the applicant and the defendant. So the woman who filed was saying it was my baby and it was stolen from me. And so that's just more clues. And that was the one also that Solomon ended up giving the child to. So let's just, I want you guys to come in. I want to hear what you guys have to say about this. The link is in the chat room, right? Let me see here. The link is in the chat room now. I'm going to go ahead and put the what we're doing here. I'd like to see if we can get you guys in here. What are your thoughts on this? Has this been helpful? I mean, is this a series that you guys want me to continue doing? The link is in the chat room. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about this. We got, get the likes up, please. We got like 61 people in the chat room. We got less than 100 people in the chat room. I want to get these likes up. Show your appreciation by your contributions also. That's another way you can do it. Go ahead and join the conversation. We got some great guys in here. Let me see if we got any comments. Of course, Volcanus, thank you so much. Brandon, thank you too. There was another story, and as you guys come in, there was another story concerning King. I believe the lady's name was Queen Betha, or Beth, not Bathsheba. I'm going to have to pull this information up, but there was another story where a queen had come to visit Solomon, and she had heard about his wisdom. And so Solomon was challenged. She brought a fake bouquet of roses and a real bouquet, a fake bouquet of flowers and a real bouquet of flowers. And she said, Solomon, which is real and which is fake? And so, this is like, I mean, look at the challenge. It's like being the best fighter in the neighborhood. You got all these people coming up trying to challenge you and stump you. So what Solomon did was he opened up the windows, and at a certain point, some bees came in and they landed on one flower versus the other, or one group of flowers, one bouquet of roses. And he said, that's the real one. And what does that mean? The ones that the bees land on were the ones that were real, because why? Bees are not typically going to go try and they want to pollinate flowers. So they're not going to pollinate fake flowers. They're going to go for the real flowers. But I think I actually have that story. I'll let you guys check this story out. But look, if you want to join the conversation, come in. If you're interested in talking about Solomon, did I miss something? Am I wrong somewhere? I'd like to know. Let me know. But let's listen to the rest of this story. And it'll give us some more insight into Solomon's wisdom. But again, I want to talk about lessons we can learn in dealing with single mothers, based on what Solomon's ruling was.
Test Solomon brings him 2 sets of flowers, one of which is real and the other that is artificial. She asks Solomon to determine which is the real set of flowers, given that they look virtually the same. Unable to simply decide, much like with the 2 women, Solomon resorts to a logical solution, whereby he has the windows of the palace opened. 2 bees fly in and parade around the real set of flowers, given that only the real flowers were capable of attracting the bees in the first place. Through this, Solomon is easily able to determine which set of flowers were real. Once more, Solomon's wisdom is demonstrated, and done so effortlessly, that he does not exert himself at all to come to a conclusion. It serves to show off just how wise he is, and how great his God is, given that his wisdom came from his God, that he can solve conundrums that would stump the average man. As always, guys, if you've enjoyed today's video, then feel free to give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe.
All right. So we got a chance to kind of look at Solomon. I hope what I wanted to do is kind of give you a little bit more information as to who he was. The things that we understand about Solomon. And look, if you guys want to join this conversation, come in. I'd love to have you guys come in. I mean, I think this is the best thing we can do. We're having an intellectual conversation about characters, about personalities, famous men from the Holy Bible. This same holy scripture that a lot of young people run away from. This is the wisdom that you're looking for. Even I believe Kevin Samuel says, if you read the Bible, you wouldn't need red pill. You would need all that. If you read this Bible like we're reading it and you're learning, think about the total disregard that King Solomon really had for women. I mean, you got 700 wives and 300 concubines. You're not really paying attention to all the back. You know women's nature very well at that point. And so, but I'm glad to have Devin Lockett in here. Those of you guys who want to join the conversation, the link is in the chat room. Devin, what is your impression of Solomon based on what we've read today? What do you think? Did you learn something new? What stands out? Go ahead. Just take the floor, sir.
Well, you got to understand that, I was raised in the church in New Orleans, so I've heard that Solomon's the man, man. Solomon's the man. And I think it's very poignant that you brought this up, because we're at a time right now where the courts presume that the mother is the best parent for the child, and the mother's not always the best parent for the child. And more recently, in the last 10 years, I'll say, right, I'm seeing that not only are Black men not fulfilling that stereotype of being absentee fathers or deadbeats or whatever, but from what I understand and from my own observation, man, brothers are stand-up men when it comes to wanting to be with their children and wanting to be the most responsible parent of their children. And,
and here's the thing, I want to go there, but I also want to analyze Solomon's character. Now, what do we know about Solomon? Solomon God offered him anything that he wanted. He could have asked for endless life. He could have asked for all his enemies to be killed. He could have asked to rule forever and live forever. He asked for wisdom so he could be a better ruler. So what does that say about his character? To me, it says he's a selfless person, only interested in the well-being of the state of Israel. He took his job very seriously. Now, what else did he do? Some would call this ruthless. He killed his half brothers, got rid of all of them, like killed them. He dispatched them, and he did it quickly in a very ruthless way as soon as he got to the throne. So what does that tell us about Solomon? Those two things. What does that tell us about him?
That in hot and cold, he used discernment and not emotion. He used discernment. And that's that's the essence of wisdom. And for him to ask God, for Solomon to ask God for wisdom, means that to a certain extent he was already wise, because only through life experience do you learn to understand that wisdom gives you peace in your heart, and it makes it easier for you to sleep at night, because wisdom gives you the ability to understand what the heck is going on around you. I mean, I got two characteristics that come out: selfless and ruthless. Those are the two things that I see about. He's wise, but he's also ruthless. Okay, because he killed his brother. Now, fast forward to these two women and these children. These are two prostitutes coming to his court, the richest man in the world. He got 700 wives, 300 concubines. What do you think his perception of women was? Pretty much accurate. It was pretty much accurate. We nowadays they call it red pill, right? But no, he had a straight up understanding of women, when they're married, when they're not, when they're the first woman, when they're the second, when they're number 300, when they're jealous, when they're young, when they're mothers or when they're not mothers, when they're envious of each other and fighting and competing against each other. So he heard all of that. When these two ladies came in with that baby, he had already heard that among his concubines. He'd already come across not maybe a baby, in question, but he had already come across that type
of conflict between women before. So he knew how, you know, I hate to use the S-test word, right? But just like that woman was S-testing him with the roses, he was S-testing them on their heart, on their character, and who was really a mother. Even if it wasn't the biological mother, who wanted to see that child survive had the character to be his mother.
And see, the thing is, that comes into play because he is sitting in a position as the king. He's already sacrificed a wish from God so that he can be the best. In other words, I could have been everything. I could have been a God myself. You know, I could have had eternal life. But instead of that, I simply asked for wisdom so that I could be a better ruler. So that says a lot. He's willing to give all he can. Because if God is willing to give you something, you done gave up everything. Like, because you asked for wisdom as opposed to everything else. So that means he's willing to sacrifice his all for the state. So it seems to me that his interest is solely in the states. His interest is solely in maintaining the state of Israel. So when these two women come in here, the decision that he's making is going to be the one that's best for the state. In that characterization, do you understand why he chose the woman who was willing to give the child up, as opposed to who was willing to have the child cut in half, even if that meant he was taking the child away from the biological mother? What are your thoughts?
Absolutely, brother. He was wearing his crown. He was sticking with God's mind. He was sticking with God's mind for the state of Israel, for the nation of Israel.
What happens? See, what happens if you give the child to the woman who's willing to kill the child?
Even if the child lives, she's not going to raise that child right. She's not going to love that child properly. And that child is going to end up costing the state of Israel. He may not be a soldier or a blacksmith. He may just be a thief. He may just be a criminal after being raised by a woman who didn't mind seeing him die as an infant.
What happens to a woman when she's already determined in her mind that she's going to kill her child or have her child killed? What do you think? What kind of emotional, because women are naturally tied to their children. That's why they have to sit in there and struggle with them for 9 months. If a woman is willing to kill that child, what does that say about her? Even if, let's say it's her biological child, she's willing. And I'm asking you this, and I don't want to seem like it's a trick question.
No, man.
But we got a lot of women who try to abort their children.
His soul.
We got a lot of women who abort their children. What does it say about a woman who's willing to see her child dead because it's more convenient for her to live a life without that child? Because that's what one of those women was contemplating, according to that Jewish interpretation. What are your thoughts on that?
Brother, you hit a hot spot with that abortion, man, because that's the truth. That's the truth. That her soul is dead. If she didn't mind seeing her child dead or her child suffer, or even just used as an instrument to gain sympathy and pity for herself. There's a lot of women like that with Munchausen by proxy syndrome. That woman's soul is already dead. You know, I hate to jump holy books, man, but remember the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, I went to heaven and it was filled with the poor. I went to hell and it was full of women.
Interesting. So, but back to the point of what we're dealing with here. You got a woman who's already separated herself emotionally and mentally from this child and is willing to see this child dead. So if we take that and we move forward to now times, you got a mother who's had 3 or 4 abortions and she's got 2 or 3 kids. Now, I can't see if you as a mother are willing to separate yourself from your own child. If you as a mother are willing to abort your own child, that means you can easily separate those ties. Before you go into that abortion clinic and have them do what they do, that performance, you've got to have a separation mentally. Yep. And for it to happen over and over again. My God, anybody else who wants to join in this conversation, come in. I know it's uncomfortable. We're talking about the wisdom of King Solomon. Solomon was doing what was in the best interest of the state. And the question we have to ask ourselves, is there a reason why we have a shortcoming when it comes to moms in the United States? We got a lot of people blaming the fathers, but it seems like it's the mothers raising these children. So, and that's across the board, irrespective of race. We got a lot of young men and women with issues with their moms, whether it happened because of divorce and, your mother alienated the father, or whether it happened because your mother doesn't even know who your father is, whether it's the white, Hispanic, Asian, Latino, Black community, it's happening. So the question is, what kind of mothers are these? And what would Solomon say based on what we know? What would be in the best interest of the state? It's an interesting question. The link is in the chat room. I like to hear what everybody else has to say. What are your thoughts? What else you got to say about this? This is a deep topic, and I know we went way somewhere with it, but go ahead. What are your thoughts?
Brother, you hitting a lot of really, really important angles, because it's not only abortion, it's not only an abortion issue, it's also a custody issue. Because we're coming from, if you look at it from this point of this Bible verse that you brought up today, okay, and you juxtapose that upon how normalized abortion has become in our society, and how many women actually are out there who have had one or two or however many abortions, single or married, then we're going to come to the realization that there are a lot of women with that type of heartlessness still living among us. And they're not necessarily the best. We presume that the woman's always the best guardian for the child and always the best, parent for the child. And when couples split up, but that's a very dangerous presumption to make, because only a woman can make the choice to abort a child. And apparently many women are making that choice. And so therefore, why do we presume that a woman who could kill her own child inside her own body is naturally going to be the best parent for that child once the child is born?
Right.
See that? Why?
Or any other child she may conceive. You see, that's the thing. Right. If you're willing to kill your child, if you're willing to kill your unborn child, what kind of mother does that possibly make you? How does a state? How would a King Solomon look at you as far as your fitness to be a mom? And so and if we look at this situation, this woman was willing to kill this child, and therefore he took the child from her and gave it to the woman who wasn't. So what does that mean? King Solomon deemed women who are willing to kill their children unfit mothers.
Yep.
You see, and this is the Holy Bible. Why don't they talk about this in the church? Why is this not a subject? Why does a lawyer and Mr. Devin Lockett, why do we come up with this on a random Sunday afternoon and the preacher won't talk about this in church? Because clearly the scripture is there. It's not something I've made up. King Solomon basically determined any woman who's willing to kill this child or kill her own child as an unfit mother. And it should go to a woman who's not willing to do that, who's willing to sacrifice on this child's behalf and give him away to whoever so he can maintain his life. Why don't they talk about that in the church? Any of you Bible thumpers, well, y'all, I want you Baptist, Lutheran, Catholic, come on in here. I want you to tell me why your pastor has never had this conversation with you guys in open church. And it's right there written in the Bible. We all are familiar with this story of King Solomon, but nobody has ever said this. I've never heard it. T.D. Jakes, Creflo Dollar, none of them. But go ahead. What are your thoughts on that?
Brother, there's a very popular Catholic priest whose name escapes me right now, a young priest, and he's making some fiery videos on YouTube talking truth, saying straight up, you can't be a Catholic and a Democrat at the same time in this day and age. Especially,
I don't even want to talk about. I want to know, how can you be a Catholic or a Christian and be the person who's aborted a child?
Right.
How does that happen? Or how does that happen? That's what I want to know. Because see, here's the thing: is it 21 million? I think YouTube is gonna come for this stream quick, y'all. Shout out to Alfonso. Thank you so much for the contribution. How can you be a Christian and you've had abortions? How can you be a Christian and you pay for your girlfriend to have an abortion? How does that happen? You killed John, she killed the child. She went down there and had the procedure, but you paid for it. How do you call yourself a Christian? What would Solomon say about you as a father? Yeah, we get what he says about this woman as a mother, But what does he say about men who help finance that? What do you think? Go ahead.
That's disgusting, man. I mean, you're right. He's just as much. He's even a bigger punk, right? Because a man, unless a man goes to war or has like a severe conflict or a life or death situation, he can go his whole life from birth to death and never take another life, never commit that sin, thou shalt not kill, right? Or if he does, usually if a man has to kill somebody in the course of his life, it's bred extreme circumstance or he's sent off to war. And for a person to take another human life, it takes part of your soul, or it takes the absence of an essential part of a human soul to be able to turn a blind eye to the stopping of a heart, the stopping of a human heart. How you can do that to a heart that is beating inside your own body is beyond me. Okay, I'm not a woman, so it'll never be my situation to handle. But I don't
see, the thing is, we have to sit as King Solomon said. He was. What's in the best interest of the state? It is not. Has it been in the best interest of the state to have women who regularly have abortions, raising our and were willing to kill their own children, raise our children? Has that worked out well for the Black community? How many has it been? 18 million Black babies aborted since 1971. Yeah. Children with heartbeats. Is that how many? So you got 18, you only got 22 million Black women in America, and we have had 18 million abortions.
Right.
What does that tell you about the type of women that we have? And what does that tell you about the men who are paying? I mean, unless they go to a free clinic, what does that tell you about the type of men that are paying for these abortions? I don't know how much an abortion costs. I'm assuming is a procedure. But what does it say about us as a people? What would King Solomon, sitting in judgment, bestowed upon him God's wisdom, what would he say about Black Americans in our state right now if we're willing to kill our own children to the tune of 18 million since 1971? What do you think? What are your thoughts?
Brother, there's only 44 million of us, 45 million of us. That means that our nation would be 50% stronger right now if we had not been one by one making those very selfish decisions of murdering our own children since the 1970s to now. Think about it. I mean, where my business, I have a business, man, and the complex where I am, there's only one other African-American business person, and that is a sister with a hair salon. There's nobody else. There's no brother that I can go knock on the door and say, hey, man, you got a ream of paper I could borrow or some toner or whatever. Nobody. That's our nation that's suffering because of that.
Now, I get the fact that people say, well, I'm doing it because I can't raise a child. I don't have money. I get that. But what does that say about your character? That your remedy is to murder the child. Now, I don't want to play the games. You got a baby growing in your stomach and kicking. That's a life. That's a life. It's I don't care what, it's a life. It's a life, whether or not you want to call it a child or not. It's a life. And on top of that, it's a life that you had a part in bringing forth into this world. So you're killing a life, period. Whether you want to call it a child, an infant, or whatever, you're killing a life, if left alone in your womb, would grow to be a human being. And so what does it say? What does it say about those who would be willing to commit that murder? I mean, what would King Solomon say on that? But go ahead, brother. I know, and I'm sorry I caught you off guard.
No, you're right. You're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah, you're absolutely right, man. I mean, from thinking about it from the nation's perspective, right? We don't need the kind of women that can't bring forth children into our nation, man. Do you know, as terrible as the Nazis were or whatever, man, the Germans used to give military ribbons to women for giving birth because they were making their nation strong. Now, whether you like them or hate them, they definitely had a very strong sense of nationalism. And we need to start thinking along those lines. We need to start honoring the sisters.
Well, I don't ever want to equate African Americans to the Third Reich or the Fourth.
Right.
They did some horrible atrocities to. They didn't like Black people either. If you look at what they did on Shark Island, they started their genocide on Shark Island with Africans, and then they took it back to Germany. So they committed some horrible atrocities.
Back from Leopold.
Yeah, but the bottom line is that we don't ever want to equate what they did. Yeah. But either way, I want to acknowledge James Morton. He says, I do not believe in abortion. I support my stance by not creating unwanted pregnancies or paying for abortion. 50 or 4 years on this earth, no children, no guilt. I get that. But see, the problem is, are we fighting? Okay, think about it. I mean, look at the way the king's court gasped when King Solomon said, bring me a sword. They were like, oh my God, what a disgusting thing. Now, imagine King Solomon is sitting in one of these operating rooms where these women are having these abortions, they literally having those children sucked out of them. What would he say? How would he adjudicate? How would he, with God's wisdom, how would he adjudicate that? See, this is kind of where we are. Anybody who wants to join in, this is a hot conversation. I'd love to hear what y'all have to say. I mean, it's Sunday. This is Sunday. We talking about the Lord's word. Some of you guys might be uncomfortable with it because there's plenty. There's 75 people in here. There's some women and there's some men who have either had abortions or paid for some abortions or entertained the thought of it. But go ahead, man. What else would you like to say on this thing?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, man. He's thinking with God's mind, and God is a killer, just like God is the giver of life. Mm-hmm. God is the taker of life. Mm-hmm. And it only by making it as grave as life and death could he really truly pull the character out of both of those women.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think our ministers don't talk about this? What are they afraid of?
They're afraid of losing these I don't need no man women that are putting money and putting the tithing in every Sunday. If the minister actually came up and said abortion was wrong or LGBTQ is not within God's design, he would lose his congregation, because for Black Americans, the religion has become liberalism. And the religion of liberalism has taken over the Bible. Back when Blacks were predominantly Republican, we argued the Bible and the Constitution. We were very into politics. We were very into having guns. We were very into owning businesses. And we always talked politics from the Bible and the Constitution. That's when the daddy was home. That's when Black fathers were at home predominantly. Now they've turned us into a matriarchy. They've turned us into a gynocracy. They've turned us into this, this whatever of women, raising thugs and I don't need a man and all the rest of that. And I'm not just putting all of the onus on the sisters, because they're in the position because the brothers are weak enough to allow them to be in that position. But the brothers aren't going to church, and the brothers aren't putting money into aren't putting in the tithing, and the minister still has to keep the lights on. And so now the minister is left with the conundrum of, do I tell the truth, which is what a minister and a man of integrity would do, but he's probably sitting with a smaller crowd in his church than
so the minister is making business decisions instead of godly decisions.
Of course.
So basically, whoever pays the most is who gets the word they want to hear. I don't think that's what Jesus Christ intended, but I think that's where we went wrong. And I guess it's good that we have spaces like this where men like you and I and all these other men can speak openly and honestly. Those of us who will and are willing to talk about the Holy Scriptures. I would love to get somebody in here who tell me I'm wrong about this biblical interpretation of Solomon's wisdom. And if I can recap, it seems to me that Solomon had the interests of the state in hand, in heart. He was concerned about the state, who's going to make the best mother, as opposed to who was the biological mother. He weighed the legal effects and what would happen, because the Bible, because it says he thought for a while. He didn't just make a rash decision. He thought for it on a while, and he told that girl to stand up. Aren't I your king? And aren't you a citizen? He established that he had jurisdiction over this woman, that they were both prostitutes or widows. And so, he made a wise decision on behalf of the state, because at the end of the day, that's his primary objective, not making either one of these women happy, but the state. And so, I mean, what did we miss? Give me something else. Maybe we missed something else. Anybody who wants to join in, come in. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. This is King Solomon. I've never heard this discussed in this much detail, but go ahead.
Yeah, brother. I mean, you're absolutely right. We have to think with the crown of King Solomon, with the mind of King Solomon. We have to think of what is best for our nation. What is best for our nation as Black Americans in this? And I think a lot of brothers are on code. I think a lot of brothers are on code with this, man. But we got to pull the sisters on board with us. We have to. We have to.
Well, I think King Solomon, if we can take a lesson from him, he would suggest we simply impose our will and do what's in the best interest of the state. Because he was willing to take the child from both of them, cut it in half, and say neither one of y'all can have it. So there we go. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't wait around. I don't think any of these men in the Bible or King Solomon in his wisdom would wait around for women to decide what they want to do. I think men have to move forward in wisdom. We, be prayerful and move forward, like-minded men who are of that same, who want the best interests of the nation, and move forward. I think that's really all that we can do, because, I find, and maybe you find this too, women are like cats. You can't really make them do what they have to just want to follow you. And when they follow, there's some benefits and some obligations associated with following, you see? That's just my thought. But I mean, the other thing, we try to just look over the fact that Solomon was ruthless. Like we look over that fact. He was ruthless. This man was ruthless, and he dispatched his brothers and sisters. He was willing to cut this baby in half. And clearly people believed him, because it was like, oh my God, so it says a lot about him, man. What else did you pick up in here that you might not have picked up about in this conversation? Because, what else do you think what else did you pick up in this conversation? I'd like to know, because, you're a studied man, with the word. What are your thoughts? What else did you pick up?
I'm about integrity, brother. And I have to honor the man's integrity. Right. I have to honor King Solomon's integrity. First of all, to pray for wisdom instead of praying for the concubines and the money, because he got that.
Yeah.
By having integrity, he deserved all the rest of that too. And secondly, I was thinking, I try to put myself in his shoes, right, in his position, and I'm like, once you surrender to God. Right? Once you surrender to God Almighty and you relinquish all of your selfish desires, and you are able to live in that sense of pure integrity, everything is easy. Yep. Everything is easy, because the only conflicts come from your own selfish desires. And once you're able to reach that level, then you can wear the crown. Then you deserve to wear the crown.
Hey man, that's you definitely hit home, man. So either way, I think we hit pretty much. It's not a complicated conversation. We hit most of the issues that I think we should hit. I hope that you guys in the audience have enjoyed this back and forth, and just having two Black American men discuss this. I think it's good. I think it's about time, because the last thing I want to do is throw away the Holy Scripture. There was a gentleman, Dr. John Henrik Clarke, who said, don't throw the Bible away. And for those of you guys who don't know, he was one of the greatest African historians, in the history, in the 20th century. And he was Afrocentric, Pan-African, pro-Black, all that. And he said, don't throw the Bible away. We have a lot of people talking about, oh, this is a white people book. And I'm like, no, this is wisdom. White people weren't even able to read and write at the time this book was written 2,000 years ago. And the stories have been circulating around the Middle East and whatnot for hundreds and hundreds of years before it was ever codified. And so, yeah, of course, when you take the book and you turn it into English and Hebrew and Latin and all these different languages, yeah, you're gonna lose something. But we understand that 2 women came to the king, and the king said, "I don't know who baby this is for," as they say down in who this baby for. I don't know who the baby for, but let me tell you who's going to be the mama. It's going to be the one woman who is willing to see the baby live than you. And there's information that's not a black or white issue. That is definitely a judgment issue. That is definitely, we need to learn who is this man. This is the wisest man in the world, and this is the decision. What that also tells me, man, is that sometimes wise men have to make tough decisions. That doesn't mean they're good or bad. It just means they're doing what's in the best interest of the state. And I think when people understand that he was coming from the perspective of a leader, he was looking at it from the perspective of a leader whose obligations are different than the individual, that they'll understand more. But until they are in the position of leadership, until they know that what they do affects, until they realize that what they do not just affects them, but also affects their following, they can't be leaders. I think that's why we have a lot of, I hate to bring this up, we got a lot of young women who are quitting on high profile stages like the Olympics, and they don't realize that there are a lot of other people who follow them, who look up to them, who see them as leaders. And they don't know the effect that that's having. But that comes from having a king's eye view, a queen's eye view, if you will. But in the meantime, look, I appreciate my man, Devin. We've had a great conversation. It's a good Sunday to have this conversation. I hope you guys, if you appreciate the conversation, hit the #1 button. Let me know you appreciate the conversation. Hit the #1 button. Again, on this page, it's an opportunity for Black men to speak. This page is open to Black men across the world. I'm an advocate for Black American men. What does that mean? That means I'm speaking to you from what is in the best interest of Black American men, just like people in Jamaica, people in Nigeria, people in Ghana, people in the UK. You have your own Black advocates over there. You have your own Black male advocates. If you don't, you should. We in the United States, Black men don't have an advocate. So what I'm doing is I'm using this platform to speak up on behalf of Black men from a Black man's perspective, on behalf of the interest of Black men. That doesn't mean you should be offended, but you might be. That doesn't mean you shouldn't like it, but you might not like it. But what it means is it needs to be heard. It's a perspective that needs to be heard. Many of you all talk about Black men, but you don't talk to Black men. And then when you choose Black men to talk to, they're the most left wing or right wing or way out on some end of some other whatever system. We're talking to Black men who are moderate, who are in the middle, who are between middle, upper middle class, lower middle class. You got some poor brothers, but more importantly, you have thoughtful men who are willing to speak about issues intelligently. Just like we spoke today about this King James version of the Bible. Now, I challenge any one of you preachers out there, any one of you Bible thumpers, come on in, let's talk. I invite you in, not because I think I'm right, but because I want you to prove me wrong. And I want you to prove me wrong because that's how I learn and that's how everybody else learns. I should not have to fill this spot. There should be some preacher, some reverend, some priest in America speaking on behalf of the Most High and Jesus Christ, if you call yourself a Christian, and should be saying these things and interpreting these scriptures as they are so that people could get the food they need. Because see, it's the truth that God wants you to speak. Don't just read the Bible and pay your tithes. Don't just go to church every Sunday and think you're holier than thou and you're doing all kind of stuff. The reason that people are starving for the word is because y'all not feeding them. You feeding them fast food. They need some home cooked meals. This is home cooking. You see, and this is where we at. And this is what I think this is an important series that we do. I try to dedicate Sundays to this, man. I appreciate you, Devin, man. Thanks for coming in. I appreciate everybody. It's been a great conversation. It's always good. And other than that, man, this is Uncle D. And as I always say at this time, man, I'm out.